My name is Annelies Noordhoff, and I'm one of the program makers at Studium Generale. You can find all our programs on our website, and if you don't want to miss anything, feel free to subscribe to our newsletter. Tonight is the first lecture in the series That's Disgusting. What we consider to be disgusting varies from person to person and from time to time. Next Monday, historian Ruben Verwaal will be here to talk about his book Blood, Sweat and Tears, Bloed, Zweet en Tranen. He's here. Say hi. Next to him is Karen Hollewand, and she will interview him about his book. And it's about why we find bodily fluids so disgusting and how it changed over time, how we think about sperm or blood or sweat, and how it was even normal a few hundred years ago to wash your clothes in urine. It's very strange now, I think. But tonight, we're going to learn all about sex and disgust. Because why, if we find bodily fluids so disgusting, how is it possible we can have pleasant sex? I think that's a big question. And Charmaine Borg, she will tell us all about this evening. She's an assistant professor at this university. She was born and raised at Malta, educated at King's College in London, and she obtained her PhD at this university in Groningen, and she's still working here in Groningen. And nowadays also in the sex research lab about sleep and sexual arousal. A warm applause.
So thank you for, can you hear me well first? So and so, I see. Okay. Better? Yeah? Okay. So I'm really delighted first to see so many of you here today, and I'm a bit worried that this is moving by itself. So we hope it goes better later on. So today I'm going to talk about how we are exposed to these sex stimuli that are intrinsically so disgusting, but yet again, we still approach them. And in general, we would like to engage with these stimuli. I'm going to make a short disclaimer here. I'm going to use he and she, man and woman. So I'm going to use these pronouns just because most of the research conducted in this field is done with men and women. So apologies for that. But what we need to be aware of that whatever I'm going to talk about applies and transcends through any gender and sex affiliation. So it doesn't really matter in terms that we all are exposed to the same feelings and emotions. And generally, I would prefer to leave the questions you might have at the end of the presentation, because then one question will generate another question and we can have a better dialogue. But if, on the other hand, you have a really burning question that it cannot be pushed back to the end of the talk, please feel free, raise your hand, and we will deal with that. Okay, so thank you so much for the invite to be able to open the Studium Generale session. I'm very, very honored and very anxious to be here after 10 years that I defended my PhD here on this desk. And now I'm here to give this talk. So I almost can feel the anxiety I felt 10 years ago. Now, when I look at the table, it feels a bit scary. So I prefer not to look there. Okay, so in my agenda, I'm going to tell something about what is disgust. Because we are mentioning this term very often now, but what is it? And how is disgust really related to sex? And then I'm going to talk about a model that we developed 10 years ago about how disgust and sexual arousal really communicate together, like this bidirectional relationship, that it's obstructive. And then zooming in sexual arousal, and harnessing sexual arousal in order to understand how we can optimize sexual arousal in order to improve our well-being. For example, improve our sleep and feeling of restlessness, improve the experience of pain, as well as having a more satisfying sexual and cohesive relationships. And then I will give you 3 different trajectories of research lines under this heading of sexual arousal that we do with the current PhD students. And at the end of the talk, like the last 30 minutes or 20 minutes, I would like to keep it focused on how we can improve our sex life. What are these myths that are keeping us tight within kind of a cage that we should not be in? So debunking the myths that are not being helpful for us or anyone else. Who am I? I was introduced very nicely already, so I don't need to give a lot of attention here. However, I just would like to say something about the trajectory of my academic journey, because I get a lot of students asking me, but how to become a sexologist? What do you do? And so I will say just very briefly, I did my first degree at the University of Malta, and then I did my master's at King's College London in mental health sciences, and then I did my PhD here at this university. And now I feel very privileged actually that in our department we have officially the sex lab now with our group PhD students and a number of master's students. And I'm involved at the European level as a founding member of the European Sexual Medicine Network and also in the executive board of the European Federation of Sexology. So it feels really special that we have an active team within the Netherlands, but also at the European level. Okay, so how I started my research, actually, this is going to be a bit annoying, sorry for that, so slides are going to pop on and off. I started by wanting to understand why women with sexual pain say that they would like to have intercourse, but they are unable to do so, trying to understand the mechanism of these sexual pain disorders. And we used a number of different methodologies. We used brain responses, so measuring by using an fMRI. We used EMG to measure the muscles, how people respond to these sexual stimuli, and we used questionnaires. We used a number of different measurements, and the consistent finding was that these women respond with disgust over and above any other aversive emotion rather than sexual arousal towards sexual stimuli. That was very perplexing. What was even more perplexing, that at some point we decided, we decided, okay, then let's see how women respond, like women that feel they do not have any sexual complaints. How do they respond to sexual stimuli? Hardcore sexual stimuli with very limited context. And we understood that these women that have no sexual complaints responded to hardcore pornography, so with limited context, with aversion, with a disgust response. And this was even more perplexing. What's going on here? And we understood that perhaps because these women were in a scanner, we were bombarding them with this hardcore pornography, no context whatsoever. They were not ready, not sexually ready. So, of course, we kind of contaminated their environment. And then we wanted to really understand what is then disgust. How is disgust related to sex? Because it seems that it plays a very integral role. If women are responding with this emotion on so many different methodologies, right, rather than with sexual arousal. And disgust is a very complex emotion. I will explain to you, or I try to explain to you what disgust is. So, if you bear with me for a moment, I'm going to do a little experiment here, experiential exercise. And if I had to place this plate of apple in front of you, and I request that you touch the apple in the center, it's wet and emanates a rather unpleasant odor. Next, I ask you to grasp it delicately between your thumb and your index finger, bringing it closer to your lips. You touch it with your lips, and with some reluctance, you take a bite of this apple. And exactly, some of these facial expressions that I'm seeing here, it's exactly what disgust is. This feeling of repulsion, like, did you feel it? It's visceral, you feel it in your body. And these are the facial expressions that I just saw in the room a few seconds ago. And what is interesting as well is that disgust increases as a function of proximity. So you can understand it when the apple was closer to your lips, the imaginary apple was closer to your lips, then the response is even stronger. You feel it even stronger. And it also concentrates around the skin and body apertures. So specific body apertures are particularly disgust sensitive and disgust potent. So in other words, when they are on somebody else's body, then they are really disgust potent. They really are high on disgust. But when they are on your own body, they are very high on disgust sensitivity. So for example, these body parts that I'm talking about are those that surround our body apertures. For example, the skin, the mouth, the tip of the penis, the vagina, the nostrils. You can already, I think, start connecting, right, why sex and disgust then go together. But that's not all. So if I take you with me, I need to make sure that I make everything in synchrony because everything is moving a bit on its own. I'm sorry for that. So if I had to rewind the clock and take you back to 2020 or 2021 when we were faced with the unprecedented pandemic, during those months, we became very aware of the contamination risk. We applied so many strategies in order to keep distance between us and the potential contaminant, right? We were washing our hands really religiously, keeping distance, wearing masks. We did so much to keep the pathogens away from us. However, it is crucial to understand that actually the presence of these pathogens was present from the very beginning of our existence. So there should have been a mechanism in order to protect us from being contaminated. And disgust functions in this way. It has been explained from an evolutionary perspective that the main function of disgust is to protect us against contamination in the outside world. So to create this distance, it guides us to create distance from the contaminant. And it works by inducing this overwhelming urge to create distance, to create avoidance. And in that way, disgust is really a helpful emotion. And we're really happy. We should be grateful that disgust is there, because otherwise we'll be having sex with all kinds of people, with our brothers, with our sisters, with our parents. We would be eating all kinds of toxic things. But disgust is the emotion that functions in order to protect and guide us to keep these boundaries. The main problem is when disgust properties are associated with stimuli that are with the wrong stimuli. For example, if your partner that before was for you the source of arousal and sexual appeal, now it's more being associated with repulsion. It can be about something that a person or some feature of a person that is now being repulsive due to an accident, due to the treatment of cancer, due to so many features. It can also be a sexual script that the partner is using that instead of making you feeling sexual appeal and you want to touch that person and be in contact with that person, you're like, it's more a turning off than a turning on. So disgust is very functional, but it can also be very problematic. And now the boundaries of disgust are also very problematic. So when we talk about another very relevant emotion, for example, fear, it's very easy to unlearn. If you have a dog rushing towards you, and this dog looks very angry and it's going to bite you, and someone put the dog on the leash, the boundaries of the threat are crystal clear. The dog is on the leash, you are calmed down again. You unlearn that threat very quickly. But with disgust, it's very different. If I believe that I'm going to be contaminated because I touch this, and I believe really strongly that this is the case, no one can convince me that this is not true. Because the boundaries of the threat, I cannot see with my eyes, right? So then, it means that people generally with disgust take more the strategy of better safe than sorry. Now, we also did a number of conditioning studies to try to understand how easy people learn disgust, how easily people unlearn this emotion, as well as how persistent and tenacious this emotion is. I'm not sure how aware you are with conditioning studies. You don't need to be. What you need to know is that you have a neutral stimulus. One we will pair with something negative or something disgusting, and one we pair with something neutral or something positive. The plus, the CS plus, that is the one paired with something negative. And in this study, for example, we had a soup, a pea soup, where we really paired it with a woman vomiting and eating her own vomiting. It was really, really disgusting. But so she continued doing so, and then this pairing is happening. What you can see there on the slide is that in the acquisition, when the pairing is happening, the disgust is a lot stronger. So the dotted line is the CS plus, and the bold line is the CS minus. So the one with the negative association, with the negative pairing, is the one that in the acquisition is really strong. But that is normal. That is what you expect after this pairing is happening. But what was interesting is in the extinction, when there are no more pairings, we're just showing them the pictures. This disgust response with this neutral plate of soup remained significantly stronger and with a strong effect size compared to the other stimulus. More interesting for us is that even 24 days after and 7 days after, this effect remains. And a lot of you are students, I believe. So you know how students live. I mean, not in the cleanest, not in the best. You know, like food is not always top-notch. But still, this pairing persisted for 7 days after. So I feel this tells us how this emotion is so tenacious. It's so difficult to unlearn. And we know that disgust is a very persistent emotion. I'm going to talk about disgust and sex. However, disgust is involved in so many psychopathologies. For example, disgust is strongly involved in obsessive-compulsive disorder by the contamination type. It's involved in eating disorders, in bulimia and anorexia. It's involved in post-traumatic stress disorder, in the vulnerability for having to be diagnosed, so to say, with these disorders, to actually recover, as well as how persistent these disorders are and the symptoms are. So disgust is a very persistent emotion, and it's very, very hard to unlearn. Now, a bit theoretical, sorry for this. But what are the elicitors that really elicit disgust? And now I said I have to be a bit theoretical, so sorry for that. I will keep it as minimal as I can. The elicitors of disgust vary, of course. Some people have a predisposition, a stronger disposition than others to experience disgust. So we say there are individual differences in how frequently you experience disgust and in how negatively you experience the experience of disgust. Now, there are a number of elicitors that across cultures and across individuals, in general, of course, are considered disgusting. And some I already mentioned, the sex-related stimuli, like, for example, the saliva, the sweat, the semen, the body parts, like the tip of the penis, the vagina, etc. Now, Josh Steiber, which is a theorist in disgust research, he categorized these under these three headings. So the moral disgust elicitors, these are related to, for example, if you had to watch a person, a rich person, stealing from a very poor woman. You had to witness this experience. The disgust response, the physiological response that you will experience would be exact same as if you were, like if I had to give you that rotten apple that I showed you before, right? So this is the moral boundaries. It's to keep our moral boundaries intact. Then the pathogen disgust, it's all related to the primal part of disgust, so to say. Like, for example, we talk about rotten food, the ejaculate, saliva. This is really the pathogen type of disgust. Sexual disgust is the very complex one to understand, because most people, when you say sexual disgust, I'm sometimes also invited in conferences and they say, can you please give a talk about sexual disgust? But what do they mean is the sex-related stimuli. That's pathogen disgust. Sexual disgust is very different. Sexual disgust is when I am with my colleague having dinner, maybe brushing our arms together. This sounds very sexual, but without a sexual context, and we're working on a paper, I wouldn't have or experience any disgust. But if this person that I'm not interested in would show any interest in me as a sexual interest, and I'm not interested, that is what you experience as disgust. Sexual disgust is also experienced when there are a number of studies. They show pictures, like they would say, would you like to have sex with this person? And then they show pictures of people that you find attractive. And then they say, for example, your brother, your sister. This is the same type of sexual disgust that people experience. They will giggle and they will experience disgust. So sexual disgust evolved with the function to kind of protect in who we have sex with, to simplify it. And now we are focusing quite a bit on the emotion which we refer to as self-disgust. The type of disgust that I explained before, the elicitors, are targeted towards external type of stimuli. Self-disgust, as the name implies, is really self-repugnance, is an aversion towards the self. I'm not going to talk about clinical interventions here, but this is quite difficult to unlearn, perhaps even more than when it's directed towards external stimuli, if it's the features of the self that are causing this repugnance. There's quite some work in our labs about, for example, self-disgust and anorexia, when they really, but also when they, for example, have premature ejaculation or erectile disorders or vaginismus, that they feel that they are not a complete sex mate or not an optimal sex mate, and they have this repugnance towards the self. It can also be due to cancer treatment. I mention cancer treatment often because it really touches on so many aspects of the human as a being, as well as a sexual being. Now, okay, so now I told you quite a bit about disgust. Like I told you that so many sex stimuli elicit disgust. It is very hard to unlearn that if you're not ready for it, you will experience disgust. No, please stay there. So it's not surprising that children in pubertal age, that if they are approached by someone kissing them, that they will have this yucky response, like, oh, she kissed me on my cheek. My children do this to me too. I mean, it's very painful. And they wipe it away and they say oh, yuck, they are kissing, or they are kissing mouth to mouth on the TV. It's really interesting to see. However, at some point, they change. They really become interested in sexual stimuli. So they might giggle a bit, and then they start approaching these stimuli. So what is interesting is that this change in the response to sexual stimuli increases with the disgust response, increases with the increase in androgens. In both men and women, we have androgens. This increases, and the sexual approach kind of becomes more relevant, and as a protective mechanism, it seems that disgust increases. But then there will be contact, and contact changes quite a bit in disgust learning and unlearning. So to say something additional to this about disgust, to really explain how difficult sex is in terms of disgust, we also know from this article published a few years ago that in just a 10-second kiss, mouth-to-mouth kiss, there is shared 80 million bacteria. It's really just a mouth-to-mouth kiss. So imagine with longer exposure, I hope for you that sex takes longer than 10 seconds, and if that's so, then imagine the amount of exposure that you're exposed to. And of course, I'm not here to put you off sex, or actually quite the contrary. At the end, I'm going to say how sex is nice and how we can make it better. But at this point, I really need to say that this is it. Like really, sex is a high, pathogen exposure. It's really a huge risk that we put ourselves into. But most of us like to do it. Or I'm not sure if I can say most of us, but I can see in general people are interested or like to do it. And there is a shift that happens from pre-puberty to early adolescence, where children, first they seem to have this increase of disgust, as I said, towards all kinds of stimuli. But then towards sex-related stimuli, disgust decreases. We did a number of studies to investigate this relationship. I will show you something about this later on. And we know that due to conditioning work, to studying the unlearning of disgust, we learned that nothing really works for disgust because of the blurry boundaries of this threat. What works is physical contact, that you actually spend time, prolonged contact with the stimulus, that you can understand the consequences are not negative or nothing is happening. That is the only way that unlearning of disgust can happen. Seriously. Okay. So this is a study that we have conducted. We have conducted 3 studies, one in Poland, in Germany, and in the Netherlands, with children from 9 to 16 years of age, where we had 3 different groups. And what we found, indeed, that as I explained to you, in what we call the early, middle, and late adolescence, that the disgust increases, and later on, for all kinds of stimuli, decreases later in adolescence. What we found in this study as well is that disgust is strongest with weaker familiarity. So if like I, as a stranger to you, had to offer you the apple, it's more disgusting for you than if your partner or your mother had to offer you the apple, because familiarity, of course, makes it safer. This is not true only for the sex stimuli. For the sex stimuli, there is a reverse. So for the sex stimuli, there is the same pattern, but then there is a reverse only for the sex stimuli. So then the disgust response is higher when the source is a parent or a sibling. Just as a side note, if any of this work that I'm mentioning here is of interest to you, you can go on ResearchGate and easily download the paper for free. If you want to read more, because here I have to keep things very superficial, and I mean to a certain extent superficial, but I can't really explain the data or the methodology that we use. So if you are interested and you do not manage to ask the question here after the talk, please feel free to go on ResearchGate, download from there. Okay, so now it seems that, as I explained, we know that sex is relevant. On the one side, sex is relevant for pleasure, for reward, just because it gives you a good feeling, and sometimes for reproduction. And on the other hand, we have disease avoidance. So there is a goal competition. It's a very clear goal competition in our existence. And we need a very strong input or force to weaken this disgust. in order for our sexual life to be functioning, to be good, to be pleasurable. And 10 years ago, we designed this model where we understood, with the previous studies that I mentioned to you, but also with the studies that I will discuss with you, how these components work. We wanted to understand how really is disgust and sexual arousal. We knew they were related, but we wanted to kind of build a model and test it. And now, 10 years after, I feel that we have exhausted each line there, and we tested it very clearly, and we are kind of revisiting the model to try to update it and see what remains to be done. So here you can see that the red arrows is what hinders, and the green is the go, is what facilitates the relationship. So in the study, we wanted to understand first what is the impact of sexual arousal on disgust. Because of the study that I showed you before, that we found, in the studies that we found before, that sexual arousal, kind of when it's lacking or it's not yet there, it seems that disgust, oh, no, then we cannot have some suspense. That's not good. Okay, so I had a group of 90 women here, and we induced different moods. We had a neutral mood, so just showing them videos of going in a boring train ride, and then exciting movies, so sex and arousal, but not sexually arousing, and then just erotica. Female-friendly erotica, so not like we used in the scanner. This is erotica that women enjoy. And then we had 5 minutes of mood induction, and then 2 minutes of video, and 2 tasks. And 2 minutes of video, 2 tasks, until 16 behavioral tasks were done. And we measured everything very meticulously, and we could see, you can see some of the tasks there, where you have, not sure, where can you see? Oh yeah, okay. Where you have, for example, a dildo that they had to massage with their hands. They had things like, seriously. They had, for example, a cockroach in a cup of water where they had to have a sip with it. As you can see, there are sex-related and sex-unrelated. There was one very difficult that elicited so much disgust, and I feel very bad that I have done that. But at that time, it felt like fun. But, and yeah, I know. But I mean, what I had to do for the study, you won't believe it. For example, I had to go to the butcher and get a bull's eye, like every so often, right? I had a bowl with a worm in it, and to put it on a biscuit, and to keep it the same size, because apparently these grow really fast. We had to take it back to the soil, because we're environmentally friendly, and then bring it back, so really, this was a hardcore stuff. And what we understood here, so both for, apologies for this, these slides, what we understood that for the sex stimuli and for the non-sex stimuli, non-sex-rated stimuli, when there is sexual arousal, the evaluation, how they appraise these stimuli, its disgust reduces. So you can see there on this slide where you have the neutral, the red, the sexual, the orange, and the positive arousal, the yellow. So you could see that arousal already did something. So when you are aroused, not sexually aroused, like if you're running, for example, if you're running and someone had to hit you slightly, you will feel less pain than if you're seated somewhere because you're aroused. But sexual arousal, specifically sexual arousal, did a lot more than the mere effect of arousal, and decreased the subjective appreciation of these stimuli, both for sex stimuli and for not sex stimuli. And for the task, the percentage of tasks done, so I showed you how disgusting these tasks were, the sexual arousal, again, increased the percentage of tasks conducted. So what we could see that it's independent of each other. It reduced the subjective appreciation of disgust, of disgust towards these stimuli, but independent also increased the approach behavior towards these stimuli. And then we were interested to look at the other side of the coin. So what I just discussed with you is the impact of sexual arousal on disgust. But what is the impact of disgust on sexual arousal? Is this relationship really bidirectional? We didn't know until then. I had it nicely there set in the model, but we couldn't test it. And honestly, I had no idea why this would be relevant until there was someone called Rul, and he contacted me after reading that study, and he said, I really would like you to help me to design a study how we can weaken sexual arousal. And of course, the first impression was like, what? That's weird. Who would want to do that? Right? I mean, who would want to kill sexual arousal? And this guy, so it was not my idea, but I gained from it, he said he wanted to work on something to decrease the risk of rape. So we worked together on trying to design this study to test the impact of sexual arousal on the impact of disgust on genital sexual arousal. And we collaborated with a number of universities, including University of Wageningen, as well as with Invi, the startup company by Rul, that's Rul himself there. And we had the men participating in the study, where they had all those measurements around them. So they had an olfactometer where the small smell was kept with tubes that go directly in the nostrils. And they had EMG to make sure that we are measuring disgust, as well as penile circumference measurement to make sure that they were sexually aroused. Because they had so much equipment on them and wanted to make sure that they really get sexually aroused, because if they don't get sexually aroused, we cannot measure if sexual arousal is skilled. So we first gave them a clip, we organized the lab, gave them a clip of comedy to make them feel a bit comfortable, and then the pornography would start. The VAS there is a visual analog scale. It's where we measured the emotional response. And consistently, there was the measurement of the penile circumference measurement. Just this study was so complicated, you can never imagine. Like the air conditioning system of the Hyman's building had to be changed because that circulates the air, so all the smells from the Zorcast at the bottom of the institute was being circulated up to the fourth floor. That was really a mess. Besides that, you cannot even imagine how hard it is to use these penile circumference measurements, because they are very fragile, to use the right size. Because if you do like large, extra large, and medium, it's already very difficult to take the medium, right? Like most people will not take the right size. So, yeah. So, I mean, this study was really, really, really difficult for me. And then I had a very smart student. I am lucky in this because I'm surrounded by smart students. And she told me, why don't we make a tape with different colors that they themselves can put around their penis, and according to the color, then they select the envelope. Genius. That's what we did, and we could make the study happen. And what we saw actually in this study, so this is kind of the design how it was with the control group. They received a neutral smell, and the experimental group, when those green lines there are when the smell would be puffed in your nostrils. The neutral smell had the same effect, because otherwise it could be just that this input is making you weaken your genital arousal. So we wanted to be sure that we're controlling for the effect of the air, that the air is doing, this kind of feeling of a shock in a way. And I also want to say that in this study, the smell we used was diluted by 1 in 100,000 times. So we could not use the neat smell. I did smell the neat smell. And I was shocked because at the time I was pregnant and I thought I did something horrible, but till now my daughter is okay. I'm not sure how she will develop, but till now she's okay. So then they had the neutral and the control group, the neutral and the actual smell, and the PCR is when it's exactly what is happening. There is the arousal, so the PCR is being stimulated, is high, and then in the experimental group, the genital sexual arousal dies off. I was quite impressed that the study worked because first, the dilution was so strong that I had very little hope that we will find anything. But we did, with that high dilution. And what was interesting is that sexual arousal, the genital sexual arousal, was dead, or death killing. I'm not sure if this is the right term to use, but you know what I mean, right? It's really what we wanted to do is first having the sexual arousal generated, because it's one thing stopping it before being generated versus first having it erected and generated and then kill it. I'm sure this is not the right term to use, like kill it, but yeah. Okay. Okay, that's just to show some data there. Okay, this is the Envy bracelet that's actually developed from this smell. So I have it here today. Usually I forget it, but today I have it here. And I have nothing to do with the marketing or the financial aspects of this bracelet. We were just the science behind this bracelet. But it gives me so much pleasure and honor, actually, that we had the opportunity for, like a very unique opportunity for us as experimental psychologists to put something out in the market and have a direct societal impact. And what was nice, that Rul, the person, the initiator of Envy product, various times receives people that say, and he forwards all this stuff to me, that people say, now we feel we can walk a mile down the street just by wearing it, just feeling the confidence that they can, walk down the street in countries and areas where it's very high risk to be raped. Of course, people say, but you don't eliminate the risk of rape. Of course not. Of course not. Rape can happen with so many different things, not only with a penis, with so many different things. But it reduces the risk. And above that, it gives confidence to these people that they can be by themselves. So actually, I feel this was a great societal input. I might be a bit biased, not naturally, but yeah, it feels that this was a very good product.
Can I ask you?
Yes, sure. It's a burning question, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
How does a bracelet give the sense to the nose of the rapist?
Oh yeah, indeed it is a burning question, and thank you for asking that. So in this bracelet, you just with one press, you press this one here and you do this, and it breaks. It's the fial. But here, the smell is the neat smell. It's not diluted at all. So if I had to do that here, then everyone will be out of this building, not of this room. So of course I will not do that. But and it's the same like when you buy a gun. So it has a serial number, because of course you can use it in very wrong ways, right, if it's not protected in that way. Okay, so now the question is how I'm going to manage in time. That's the question, actually. No, that's the big question. So just to make sure that I have it correctly, it's an hour, the talk, right? Yeah, so there is no way I can say what I plan to say. This happens every time, no news, yeah. So now I plan to tell you about how we can harness sexual arousal to improve our well-being. And I have 3 PhD students that are working on 3 different trajectories that I thought I can share with you here. But now I'm going to go very superficial in explaining about their studies. And if you're interested, then you can find their work. And probably they can do a better job about their work than I can. So in a way, it would be better if you go and find the papers. So I thought, okay, as I told you, after understanding this relationship, but this bidirectional relationship of sexual arousal and disgust, it felt relevant to harness this emotion, the impact of sexual arousal in the experience of pain and relationship cohesion and sleep quality. So Lara Lacassi, I hope I'm saying her surname correct, she is a PhD student where she does exactly this. She works on the impact of sexual arousal on pain. So how can we use sexual arousal for pain, the experience of pain, to be minimized or to be better. And there is a lot of theory about this, but I'm not going into that because there's absolutely no time. But the way we did it is that we induce sexual arousal. Sorry for that, I really have to skip a lot, I don't like to do that. So the way we did it in terms of methodology, we induce sexual arousal and neutral as a mood, and then ask these women to put their hands in really cold, freezing water. The theory behind it is that if you're sexually aroused, the experience of pain will be lowered. So you will keep your hand longer there, and you also experience pain less negatively. I had this idea that if sexual arousal can weaken disgust, I was convinced that we can use sexual arousal to weaken the experience of pain. And I also spoke to many people that, for example, when they have migraine coming, that they feel the kind of these first cues that they are going to have migraine, they masturbate. And there is no research on this. It's really anecdotal data. But it seems that people know this. People experience it themselves, but there's no research on it. So we're really, Lara is doing quite a number of work now. She has 2 papers published, and one is in almost, where we are trying to optimize the study to try to find this relationship. And there's many ways we can grow in this research line. For example, we can induce pain by inserting like a bulb in the vagina of a woman, controlling the pain pressure, and then using sexual arousal, and see how we can manipulate the experience of pain. Right? So there's many ways we can develop this research line. Now we have Carlotta Osterling. Carlotta is doing 2 PhD projects, but they are 2 different lines. And they are 2 projects that I have very close to my heart. One is what we refer to as MESA, and this is on the impact of the meaning of sex and how that impacts pain and sexual pleasure. So in other words, when we use specific, very restrictive script of sex, that sex is and should be penile, vaginal, penetrative sex, and that is the only way we call sex, then the priority of women, the priority of sexual pleasure for women is put in the background. So because of that, what we refer to as having low sexual agency, women have more tendency to put the pleasure of their partner in front of their own pleasure. They consider the pleasure of their partner more relevant. And because of that, we realize that this can how do you say that? Like, women continue having sex when they are having pain. So in the clinic, if you had to say, okay, when you have a woman that says, I'm having painful sex, first line of treatment is stop painful sex. You cannot continue having painful sex because the association is going to be stronger. But they reply, but then what do we do? Because sex, for a lot of people, is penile vaginal sex. And I'm going to get that part again when I'm going to talk about debunking the myth, which I had half an hour for that. But, and then Carlotta is also working on the impact, the influence of sexual activity on sleep. How we can optimize our sexual life, sexual arousal, to increase the feeling of restfulness, what am I saying? To increase the feeling of restfulness and also lower the sleep latency. So they fall asleep quicker and they also feel more restful when they wake up. And the preliminary study that Carlotta just conducted with our student population with 233 females, this is really preliminary data. We just did the analysis very quick and dirty, so to say. What we understood from this data is that 45.8, so almost half of the people, half of these women students, experience pain during intercourse and continue having sex while experiencing pain sometimes. And they have difficulty to tell their partner that they are experiencing pain. We have a lot of qualitative data about this. I find this shocking. Shocking that at this age, in the Netherlands, like half of these students experience pain, continue having sex, and they do not communicate this experience. So I think this is information that should do something to us, right? Like we should own our sexuality and our sexual pleasure and communicate it to our partners. Okay, can sex improve sleep? What do you think? Yeah? Yeah, right? I also had this idea. So I always felt, maybe this is a bit too personal information, but sometimes if you have a good like sex evening or you had a good night, you know, like some spicy nights, then in the morning you think, I had a really good night's sleep. But you also hear, there's also anecdotal data that a lot of people masturbate to fall asleep. So more as a habitual engagement, that you just masturbate, not really a sexual experience, you just masturbate to fall asleep. And I wouldn't say that sexual touch or sexual pleasure, that's really a habitual attitude, or like something that you have a habit of doing. But it seems people have this idea that indeed sex improves sleep. So what we did a study where we had a cross-sectional study and a longitudinal study. In the first part, we just asked about the perception of these men and women. Do you think that sex improves the feeling of restfulness? And we asked a number of other questions, whether it would be more for men or more for women, a lot of different questions. And then we had a 14-day diary, measuring their sexual activity, if it's masturbation with orgasm and without orgasm, intercourse with and without orgasm. And what we found in this study is that actually, in the ideas that they had, both men and women thought that the men would have a stronger effect in their ideas of what will happen. And they both expected that intercourse with orgasm and masturbation with orgasm will impact sleep positively. In the longitudinal study, it was found that there were no differences between men and women. But the only positive effect was found with intercourse and orgasm. So I was happy with this finding because we have some evidence that sex does something to sleep. It's an area where we can really open. This research line is endless. We can develop it in so many ways. But what was said is that I really want to move away from intercourse. I want to move away that sex is this penile, vaginal, or penile, anal, you know, like we really wanted to move away from it. But now it's like we're giving the message that this is what we need to do. But we did not stop there, of course. So one might expect that because we gave them this, like these options that they had intercourse with orgasm or not, masturbation with orgasm or not, when they did intercourse, they, of course, slept with a partner. So they had a partner next to them. There might have been intimacy. They also probably did more physical activity because you can expect that, at least again, I hope it for you, that intercourse with orgasm will be a bit more exciting, more physically active than you would expect masturbation will be. And we know that orgasm, the prolactin after orgasm is a lot higher than when it's with intercourse than when it's with masturbation. So there are a number of questions now that really guide us into opening another, into designing another study, which we are doing now. We are running the second study where we are going to measure intimacy. So we're going to have the baseline is the same, like the cross-sectional study. We're measuring exactly the same what we measured before. In the diary, we're going to have 1-to-1 days now. And we're going to have masturbation with and without orgasm, intercourse with and without orgasm, and then intimacy. And I think this is a very important part, because I believe that if some of you had younger siblings or you had children yourself, children the same, like when a baby is held, they fall asleep a lot quicker. So there is something when bodies are together, when there is an intimate experience, that perhaps this as well makes you feel safe, makes you feel more comforted, and you fall asleep quicker. So this is something that we are investigating in the upcoming study. Tabea Zorn, she is looking at how can we increase sexual creativity, how can test sexual creativity, and whether sexual creativity can increase our sexual cohesion and relationship cohesion. Okay, so I always give this example. If you love Turkish food, right? Like this is your utmost favorite food, and you had to eat it. Morning, breakfast, lunch, dinner, somewhere in between, Turkish kebab, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, week 2, week 3, month 1, month 2. I think you will develop an aversion towards this Turkish kebab, right? It was originally your stimulus of excitement, your stimulus that makes you salivate before you actually see it. But what we know is that familiarity, if you remove all novelty and you do everything the same all the time, every time, you kill sexual arousal. And we know there is quite some research done in the last 2 years that bedroom boredom is increasing as a function of increasing relationship. Relationship duration. This is not good, because somewhere there's my husband there. We've been like together forever, and I'm not sure this is really giving any helpful tips for us. But, but what I want to say is that if you don't induce any type of novelty in a relationship, sexual arousal will die. Approximately, we say it's a long-term relationship after 18 months together. And this, if you can put yourself in this situation, if your partner will come from the gym in the first month, all sweaty, and after a workout, you will think, whoa, if he's inviting you to be involved sexually, then you think, yeah, this is hot. If it's like a number of years in the relationship, then I think, please get a shower. It's because sexual arousal habituates. So we need to change the script. And Tabea came up with the idea that let's include sexual creativity, which is something new, pleasurable, and safe for parties involved. And we had a control group. First, we started this study actually with 850 participants, and we ended up with 114 heterosexual monogamous couples. And we had a control group and an experimental group, and in the experimental group, they would receive over 6 weeks in baseline and then post-intervention study. And in those 4 weeks, they would receive different spicy tips. They had to go out of their safety zone. But if you stay in your safety zone, you cannot really let creativity work, because creativity is something novel. It needs to be a bit out of your comfort zone. And we gave them, for example, ideas about locations. Do it behind the window or in a car. I'm not sure if that's even legal. But, some ideas. And then what was interesting, this is, again, preliminary data, but I'm very excited about this study. I actually had neighbors walking by and saying, oh, that study was so beneficial in our relationship. I feel like, I'm doing something beneficial in the world. And what we saw, that in sexual satisfaction, both the experimental group, but also the control group, over time, they had an increase. So sexual satisfaction increased for both the control group and the experimental group. And sexual novelty had the same pattern. which is really fascinating for me, but not surprising. Because when we give a platform, when we plan sex, when we plan to talk about sex, so these people were willing to participate in a study about sexual creativity. The control group as well. The control group as well had to plan an hour on certain days of the week to come together and discuss, like cooking together, doing something pleasurable together, doing a massage to each other. So it was not novelty in terms of sex, but it's just giving a space. It's giving a platform to sex. So rather than the myth that sex should not be planned, it should be spontaneous, because good sex is always spontaneous, we really have to reverse that myth, because that myth is very damaging. We really have to plan it, put it in our agenda, give it priority. I always give this association. When I have to go to the gym or run, like I run twice a week, every time I'm going, I postpone it till I can, till I'm going to bed. I'm like, no, now I have work, now I have this, I have that. And then one time, one person told me, put it in the agenda, like as an appointment, as a normal appointment on Thursday morning. That's it, it's there. And now I just put on the clothes and I go. I never regret it. I never regret going to the gym or going jogging. But again, the next time that I have to do it, I was like, oh, maybe I'll do it tomorrow instead of today. So, and there is some similarities there, because sometimes it's not that I'm saying do sex when you don't feel like it. No. But sometimes you need to you need to create the context for yourself in order to make it happen. I don't regret going to the gym. But still I don't start like, okay, I'm going to the gym tomorrow now again. I don't do that. So I think it needs to be an idea that helps us understand that sometimes you need to create space for sex to happen and to be pleasurable and to give it priority. And the more you enjoy it, the more you do it, generally the more you enjoy it. Now I had to start discussing the myths. Now I'm going to go, can I have like 5 to 10 minutes? Yeah? Oh, they are so kind. Spontaneity. So this is what I'm saying. I think for sex, it's really important to give it priority, to make it happen, to plan it. Some people say, but if I plan it, it becomes mechanical, it does not feel like it's like natural, but sex is not natural. We need to work for it to make it happen. Otherwise, we end up taking the leftover homes, right? Because then we're tired, we're exhausted, and then it's another task. Then sex is labor. Yeah, especially when other priorities are taking, other tasks are taking priorities, like if you have small children, if you have a demanding work, if you have a stressful relationship going around you, then sex and sexual pleasure takes place in the background. And then it's labor. But if you plan it, if you open the communication about it, so for example, if some people say, but I really cannot plan sex because that for me feels really not done. It feels not okay. It feels not natural. So I don't enjoy it anymore. Then there are other ways how you can include it in your communication to open a dialogue within your relationship to discuss and make it in a playful way. And for example, saying, okay, I'm not sure I want to do this, but I'm like 20% in it. But I'm not sure. Let's see how to go. And maybe then it becomes 40. And maybe I'm going to stay here today, my 20%. So you can include it in if you open a dialogue about this, because the risk is that a lot of people in long-term relationships, they say, we kill intimacy because we are afraid that if we start, it needs to end in penetrative sex. And I don't feel like that. So they eliminate intimacy, and sex becomes like a bit nip near the ear, a bit near the neck, a bit near the breast, and then it goes penetration. That's not sex. It's part of sex, but you're eliminating the intimacy, and intimacy is a very big part of sex. And we need to work on broadening the meaning of sex, because the meaning of sex matters very much for both partners, for both men and women in the relationship. Another big myth is that men enjoy sex more than women. This is really a big one. I don't know, like 10 years ago on Facebook, I think at the beginning of Facebook or so, there were all these pictures and images that the brain of a man is all like sex, 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 and the pictures of women is like gossip, shopping, fashion. That irritates me a lot, as you can understand. But what we need to take into consideration here is that most of the work has been done in sex research and clinical sexology was done on men. In addition to that, the first textbook that put the only organ of sexual pleasure on it was published in 2021. We went up the moon and down and several other planets, and still we did not have the clitoris on a textbook. I mean, this is really incredible, right? So what we need to remember is that as the men would need to have the penis stimulated, the same size organ, actually the clitoris is the only organ in the body that the main function, the only function of this organ is sexual pleasure. So it needs to be stimulated same as the man's penis. So penetration for a woman doesn't do so much. So we get very busy with like premature ejaculation, erectile dysfunction, painful sex, but actually penetrative sex is not really what brings pleasure to women. The clit needs to be stimulated in order to bring pleasure to women. If you ask women when they masturbate, whether they insert something or whether they just stimulate their clit, actually most of the women just stimulate their clit. So this gives us information and ideas why we should not be very strict with diagnosis, with labels, with low sexual arousal disorder, we should really move away from that and see what is the context of this relationship, how we can redefine sex, redefine our sexual script, and build a better cohesion between us. Okay, I think I said enough that penetration is not the only thing, but I feel I need to say this. I love this kind of metaphor that I use. For me, penetration is really like, I don't have anything against penetration. Penetration is great, but it just needs to be an item on the menu of like this diverse menu that we can choose from. It should not be the destination of our journey, right? So I really associate food and sex a lot. Now, for many different things. Now it sounds very like strange, but I have a lot of science in my head that I can explain why this is it. But what I find interesting is that same with food and sex. If you had to reduce the meaning of sex to just penetration, for me is really just like you go to a restaurant, a Michelin star restaurant, and you say like, swallowing was great. That's penetration. Because sex is so much more. It's about the intimacy that you build, the texture, the body, the temperature, so much about it, rather than just penetration. And again, penetration is great, so it should be one item on the menu. It's not that you eliminate it, but it should be just an item like many other on the menu. And again, food. I know I'm pretty hungry, so I'm going to mention food. The same, like, for me, Indian food is the best cuisine ever. So for me, if I start thinking about Indian food, I almost start salivating already. Like, I can almost taste it, right? And this is how sex should be. The anticipation of sex, the play, and we say that play should start at the end of like orgasm, or what was the end point of that sex encounter. That because the anticipation is part of this intimacy context that you can create within your relationship. And the last one, that sex is not performance sports. It's really about the journey and not the destination. So how quickly you come, how many times you can come, it says really not so much about sexual pleasure. It's really about being in the moment and let yourself go and open the meaning of sex for you and your partner. And this is the last one. We always associate sex with the young and the beautiful and the healthy. But this is not the case. Sex and sexual intimacy shall remain until one wants it to be part of their life. Actually, when people age, they have more restrictions. They might have mobility issues, other disorders, metabolic disorders that influence their sexual performance. But then their distress reduces as well, and they are more opening, more broadening their meaning of sex. So they might have sexual pleasure more than a person in their 20s or 30s that they feel they are going strong in that aspect. So just this is to give you some more ideas about it. I would like to thank, this is important for me, I would like to thank you all for being here on this very hot Monday evening. So I appreciate it so very much. I'm really honored that you're all here. And thank you for the invitation again. I really appreciate it. And all the participants that take part in my crazy studies, all the collaborators, close and distant, staff at the ROG that deal with my crazy lab studies, and mentors and students. Some of them are here today, and I feel so honored and privileged that I have the opportunity to work with these people, that they make my life so much better. And Peter de Jong, who was my PhD mentor and who I collaborate with also in my studies. And as a take-home message, I would say disgust is a sticky emotion, very hard to understand and to unlearn. And let us break away from these myths, right, that make our sex life so more restrictive. It can be so much better than that. So happily ever after is possible with embracing small acts often and off, which will give us this bigger impact in our life. If you want to follow things about our publications, if we give talks, and there is a conference I would like to promote for those interested in this field happening in Italy, please do so. Thank you. And sorry.
Thank you very much, Charmaine, for this presentation. Inspiring. There is still time for questions, so please wait for me, and I will bring the microphone to you. Who has a question?
It's mostly a question about the detail about one of the studies, but what smell was put into the noses of the people?
So the smell, the intellectual property of the smell is not with us, so we cannot share the smell. But when we ask people to describe it, it was similar to a combination of the gas that is used for cooking in homes. That it's not only disgusting, but also a bit aversive, that you feel like impending danger. And rotten eggs, as well as kind of a fishy smell. It's something that is so intense. I can tell you that when I smell the neat smell, weeks after, I was walking at some point, and I had to ask my friends, are you sure I'm not smelling like that? Because it was so in my memory. It's very hard to kind of shake away from it. Yeah. Welcome. There is a question, I think, somewhere here.
Also a follow-up question about the smell. Why was smell chosen as of all of the human senses, why was smell chosen as the one like communicate the disgust, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
As in, there's lots of different ways that we can make people feel disgust through touch, through smell, through sounds. Why was smell the one that was chosen?
Yes, that's a very good point. We had a lot of experience with inducing disgust, and we found that having something like smell that stays intense in your memory with kind of not very clear boundaries about the stimulus would be the most intense. And we wanted something that they can carry around with them very easily. And then in discussion with the chemists and people working on the bracelets, we arrived at smell. Yes. There is another question. Yeah, there.
I'm not sure if I'm correct about this, but I feel like it's pretty common for people to maybe at least once in their life experience dreaming about having sex with siblings or parents or something like that. Like, how can we do that if we're so disgusted about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it is common, but I think people have all kinds of fantasies, right? Like, it doesn't mean that if you have a fantasy, in any way, you want it to happen in reality. So if it's a dream, it's a different thing than a fantasy. But if it's a fantasy that you are kind of consciously, let's use the word conscious, it's not really the most correct word here, but like if you are really elaborating on it with intention, still, it doesn't mean that you want it to happen in reality. A lot of people fantasize about being raped. It's exciting for them in the fantasy, but no one wants it to happen in reality. And there are a number of studies that show the disgust response that people feel towards the potential possibility of having sex with their parents and with their siblings. Yes. I'm not sure if I answered your question. You don't look convinced to me, but but yeah, that's all I can tell you. That's what if fantasy is very far from reality. Yes. Oh, sorry. Maybe I.
It's okay. It's okay. I'll just bring the microphone.
You said about how siblings don't feel sexual arousal for each other, but there's also people like foster siblings or maybe some siblings that do incest. How does that work with disgust and sexual arousal?
Yeah, I don't have a clear answer on this. It's true. There is a lot of people that experience sibling sexual encounters. Actually, we know that women experience a lot of child sexual play and sexual abuse sometimes. If there is a 5-year difference, then it's considered sexual abuse. I would say that if it's proximal, if you have the opportunity to have sex with that person, right? Because we have sex with the people that are available. So if you have a cousin or a brother that you start playing together and exploring each other's body, that's very different than actually having sex. Now, having sex, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But in general, when we look at group differences, there is this disgust response towards having sex with siblings or parents. But it doesn't exclude that there indeed a lot of people experience, I'm not sure if I can say a lot, but people do experience sexual misuse by their older siblings and parents, unfortunately. But the outliers, this is always present, right? I mean, we cannot say it's always the case. But in general, this is a response that is expressed by people when, at the potential possibility of having sex with their parents or siblings. I see lots of hands, but I'm not sure who was first, so I leave it up to you. Delegate.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the talk very much, and I really like your and also your PhD students' research topics. I think it's very important and fascinating. And I am more curious about your samples. So what about their religions, their cultural backgrounds, and also like some minority samples who are, for example, asexual? How about their mechanisms of the disgust towards sex? Do they share the same mechanism with like people, the general samples?
So thank you for your question. In general, our samples are what we can access from the university for most studies, so student sample. Then when we are looking at women with sexual pain, then we go to clinics and refer patients to our labs. So really clinical samples then. But in general, the cultural background is very small minority groups, and the rest is German and Dutch people. I don't really look into culture as yet. That's something that I never studied in my field of research. It's also not something that I'm really interested in at the moment, I must admit. However, about asexuality, I'm now working with McGill University on writing a number of case studies looking at asexuality and sexual aversion. And the sexuality is really an affiliation that people put themselves in, right? That they say, like, I'm asexual. Then if there is no distress, there is no problem. Then they are satisfied humans. The problem is, or where we come in, is if they experience sexual aversion. So it's not asexuality, but they are not having sex, or they are asexual in their behavior, but they are distressed because of that. And then it's when they come to us. So that's kind of the only contact I have at that level. Welcome.
I've forgotten. Sorry.
Hi, as a Maltese person myself.
You are?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
It's nice to see someone Maltese speaking at the podium. So I was going to ask about culture, but also religion came into mind. Does religious upbringing change disgust with regards to sexuality?
Yes, very interesting question. By a Maltese person. I mean, we're really rare species. So when this is something very unique about Maltese people. So someone says, I'm from Malta, like, really? Like, you always get this response. But anyhow, yes, indeed, religiosity and disgust expression actually go hand in hand, I would say. In sex in particular, if you have very restrictive upbringing, then your sexual repertoire is generally as well very restrictive. And when you are then more things will elicit disgust rather than sexual arousal. So for example, if someone will shows you that they are interested in anal sex, if that is for you morally wrong, then you will respond with disgust, the same disgust of the disgust I talked about, as it would be towards anything rotten. And apart from that, we also know that people that have more restrictive sexual thinking, they experience more disgust sex beliefs, and sex beliefs are more negative. So I actually have some work on that as well.
Okay, the last question.
Sorry. Sorry.
Sorry, I was wondering if there is any research on the role of disgust in like philias. So like, for example, in the case of like pedophilia, can someone have disgust for their attraction, but at the same time, kind of paradoxically, like still be attracted to the philia?
Yeah, very interesting question. This is an area of research that I was very interested in. So at some point with the University of Bonn in Germany, we were interested in kind of developing this idea, because my initial idea was that if you have sexual dysfunctions like vaginismus dyspareunia, then you have more disgust. My initial idea. And that if you have paraphilias, kind of if you transgress more, or what we consider transgressing, then you would have low disgust. I theorized. But actually, some work that is being done at the University of Bonn, they found that these people with pedophilia, particularly, this is the group they study, they have a real extreme high disgust. But the disgust is not towards the behavior. The disgust is towards very particular features of the body. For example, body hair, the wrinkled skin, what makes the body mature. Like sometimes the breast, the developed sexual organs. So about very particular aspects of the aging body, so to say, or maturing body, then the disgust is really high. And the kind of child or the sexual appeal is surrounding this purity, this kind of, that is nothing is aging or maturing. So yeah, this is all I can say. There's not much work on this, but it's a field I think that needs a lot of yeah, I think we should really invest time in this area of research. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Maybe there was one, last question.
I will give you the microphone for the last question.
I found it very interesting that you said that it reduces pain. Is there more studies about that? Because I think it's better to maybe masturbate or have a sexual experience than take medicine if it reduces.
Yes, of course I can never say don't take, I don't know, migraine tablets. I can't say that. I don't have the authority to say that. But I think we are building an evidence base where sexual arousal can lower the experience of pain. But it's not that I have the authority to say we're not going to take medicine anymore, we're going to have sex. That would be great. And maybe at some point we arrive at that stage. But indeed, we did because we know that sleep is a kind of symptom that it radiates a lot of issues on other symptoms, like it's a cluster of problems. So if you don't sleep well, you don't feel well enough, you perform worse at work, then you are grumpy with your colleagues. It's kind of a cycle of a cluster of symptoms. So I invested a lot of energy and money, I mean we, not me, but like people invested a lot of energy and money in trying to understand how to make the sleep hygiene, to make people sleep better, to feel more restful. And I think it is time that we focus on something like sex to try to, see if people, for example, if you're a clinician, as for example, you can discuss with your clients to say, okay, but what do you do? You know, like why do you masturbate, for example? And then you can start a dialogue in that direction. So we are at that stage. Hopefully, at some point, we can say masturbation against migraines or whatever. I would love that.
Well, thank you very much for coming. And shall we give Charmaine again a warm applause?
Thank you.
Yeah, and perhaps feel free to come next week to Ruben Verwaal and Karen Holle, want there are still tickets. So, and have a nice evening.
And the present for you.
Oh,
thank you so much.
much.
It's you can buy a book by yourself.
Oh, nice.
And these two.